Hello and welcome back to Be Productive. I'm your host, Clara Capano. And one of the things we want to talk about today is making sure that we are protected. There are so many things coming at us from the outside. There are a lot of cyber attacks coming in. And one of the things that could really zap our ability to stay productive is if we open ourselves out to some of these items. So, to talk about how we can better protect ourselves and some of the systems and documents, I have my friend Greg Schaefer joining us. So, Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you are an expert in this area of cybersecurity. I know you've been doing this for over 20 years. Let's talk about when we're putting our documents and when we're putting our programs together. What would you say are some of the key elements that we really need to pay attention to?
So you definitely need to start with your information security policy, your program document. It would be a overall arching governance document. It sort of sets the tone for your information security program. What I mean by that is, first of all, the why. Why are you doing this? Well, you're doing it because you want to protect your information. You want to make sure you identify where your information is. You want to make sure that through this document that you're clearly discussing the roles and responsibilities of everyone within the organization with regards to information security. And sometimes people think, well, isn't that just an IT issue? And no, it really isn't. Everybody has some sort of measure of responsibility with regards to protecting information and also to report when they think that they might have come across an issue where there was an information potential breach or some sort of a security issue. And so the policy itself, then you have this overall arching umbrella document, and then you've got many subcomponents within. I'll just spend a couple of moments going through what those several of them are. First of all is your information classification and handling. So you need to understand how to protect your information based on its risk. Yeah, obviously, like some things like public information, like a website, for example, well, that by design is public. So you don't need to keep it confidential. That would be completely against what it is that you're trying to do. But other information you want to classify as confidential, like if you're keeping credit card numbers or something like that. And then you have to understand how to handle it because there are security implications and there's privacy implications. And just briefly, the difference between the two is that security controls who has access to the information. Privacy has directions on how you can use the information. So just because, like, say, for example, you work at a hospital, you're not allowed to go in and look at somebody's medical records unless
Sure.
you have a business reason for it. And then
Okay.
some of the other elements, who can access and who has the right to access information. There's a risk management component of this because information security is all about risk management. Part of that would be vendor management as well too. And so when I talk about vendor and risk management, it's basically understanding, well, what risk does being involved with this vendor have to our organization? Because if we have a vendor that we talk about having, we'll talk about this probably a little bit later, but if we have a vendor that has our secure information, our confidential information, it doesn't remove our responsibility. We have to understand vulnerability management. That's another part of the program and the document. How are we managing our IT vulnerabilities within and external to our network? We have to make sure that folks are aware. Training is very important. So that's usually part of this program document, laying out a training program so that you're taking the appropriate courses, if you will, on a regular basis and understanding. Knowing how to recover from an incident, because more likely than not, incidents will happen. And so incident management, maintaining continuity of business operations and recovering from a disaster as far as IT, those processes, those guidelines are built into the information security. And then finally, like change management, how you're doing changes within the organization, and also how you're complying with whatever particular rules, regulations, standards that your business is beholden to. And you take all those together, wrap them up in a policy, and that becomes the foundation of every security program um, to run the security program and then grow the security program.
And people might wonder, why are we talking about stuff like this on a show called Be Productive? But you hit the nail on the head with the idea that if we don't have these things in place, something inevitably will go awry. We have
Exactly.
to be prepared for it. Now, I also know that, even though you have these systems and you have this umbrella, no organization is one size fits all. So I would imagine that it's also important that we start to tailor some of these policies to an individual company. What are some of the things that, you can do or that you can suggest people do to help them tailor it to their environment?
Well, this is actually a hugely significant problem within the industry because a lot of what we have within the industry, not only with policies, but with a lot of the approaches to information security and cybersecurity, are geared towards larger businesses. And the small and the mid-sized businesses are kind of left out a little bit, and it's a little bit more difficult for them to understand and for them to get the resources on how to do that. But the process really is the same, whether it's a large organization or a small organization. And the first step is to define, and this is going to sound a little complicated, so I'll make it as simple as possible, to define a framework that you want to align your program to. So there's a very simple one out there called, for example, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. It's got a hundred requirements that you need to meet. And it has guidance on how to meet those requirements. And then you may not meet all of those. So you look at all the requirements and you say, okay, we do this, but we don't do that. In that case, what you end up doing is you have a gap assessment. And then from that gap assessment, you risk assess those gaps. And then at that point in time, now you start talking about policy. So you don't want to take policies that are made for larger organizations. They'll have different gaps than you do. You want to start by understanding where your gaps are and where your processes are, what you need to govern, the things that you're doing right as well too, and also make sure that they're aligned to that desired framework. Now, there's you can use a template, but generally speaking, you want to write the policy to address two main points. Just to review, you want to make sure it aligns with the framework that you have chosen for your organization to follow, because you can't do information security unless you have some sort of a guiding map of some sort, and that's what a framework is. And
Mhm.
then you need to make sure that you're meeting those framework requirements and also meeting the gaps that you have identified.
Yeah. And, all of this, I know it sounds very complex to someone like me who's not in the industry. And this is why you really want to work with an expert such as yourself and your company, Viciso, because, it is so many layers. And I would imagine that there are some plug and play programs out there, but there's probably some risks. And this is why, as, a company leader, a business owner, you really want to bring somebody in to help them tailor it. What would you say are some of the biggest risks that a company can open themselves up to if they just use a generic system rather than tailoring it to themselves?
Well, the first risk is one of lack of awareness that there can be risks involved. And I know that sounds almost repetitive, but it's becoming even more of a case. It used to be, if you go back a few years, you could go out on the internet and you could do a search on the internet for show me an information security policy, show me an acceptable use policy, show me something along those lines. And you would get back some examples of templates, and then you could take them and adjust them to your format. People do that a lot. And frequently, what we would do as practitioners is that we would highlight certain areas of like a person's or a company's information security policy or one of their sub policies, look for that wording on the internet, and then we can find out that, hey, you just took a template and you basically just downloaded and just implemented it without really researching if you're doing some of the items in there. But now, because of Chat GPT, it's even easier to create these templates, and they're not usually of the same variety, meaning that they're not like a standard template that's out there. Each time you ask Chat GPT or another generative AI system to create a policy, it'll come up with something a little bit different. But the risks of doing so is that you're going to have a policy that's saying that you're doing things, and if you're not doing those items, then if you'll excuse the pun, you're giving yourself a false sense of security. And it could get to be worse because if you find yourself in an audit situation, let's just say you're going for your first SOC 2 audit, or you have to be audited for PCI reasons. And again, you say that you're doing A, B, and C. An audit basically takes what you say you're doing and verifies that you're doing it. If you're not doing it, then you're not going to pass the audit.
Yeah.
But all of that really obfuscates the biggest risk of taking policies off the net and just implementing them without really paying attention to what's in there is that if you're not doing what you need to be doing, then inherently you're going to be more insecure, if you will, with your information security posture, and therefore you're going to be more apt to be exposed for a potential vulnerability exploit.
And that's what that's the message we want is don't leave yourself vulnerable. Don't leave yourself exposed. Things are going to happen, but the more that you can do to protect yourself, because again, as small business owners, even as large corporation owners, we have a responsibility. And we need to make sure we put so much time and effort into this. Now, Greg, as I mentioned, you've been doing this for countless years. And I know that in being an expert, one of the other things that you do is you share information on your podcast. Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
So the Virtual CISO Moment is a podcast that's geared towards small and mid-sized businesses, and we pick up topics there that are relevant to those businesses. Again, some of the things that we just talked about that are not necessarily as important for larger businesses. Uh, every week, or sometimes even more frequently, I will interview a security professional in the field. The discussions are usually between 25 to 30 minutes. And you can find the podcast on any of your podcast platforms. It's also on YouTube and also um, on LinkedIn on my page every
Excellent.
time it comes out. So
Well, thank you so much. Again, these are things we need to be aware of. And I appreciate you sort of bringing it down to more of an understandable, message for all of us who are watching. So for all of you, again, make sure that you are protecting yourself, make sure you are protecting your interests in your business, because when things happen, you want to make sure that you can address them and get back to being productive. So don't go away. We'll be right back with more after this quick break.